Salutations, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland, and I'm carrying on my series for A-level history about Germany 1918 to 45. In this video, I'm going to particularly speak about the background of Adolf Hitler, who is notorious as one of the most wicked men of all time. He was Chancellor of Germany from 1933 until his suicide in 1945. What about his background? He was born on the 20th of April, 1889, in Braunau am Inn. This town is on the border between Austria and Germany, on the river Inn, and he was born on the Austrian side of the border. He had no middle name, incidentally. So he later penned the lines. Today it seems to be providential that fate should have chosen this little town for my birthplace, Braunau am Inn, he's saying. So his father was a customs official, much older than his mother. It was his father's third marriage. His father's two previous wives were deceased. His parents were first cousins once removed. Hitler had severe nightmares as a child, so much so that it had been considered sending him to a psychiatric hospital in Vienna. That did not come to pass, and perhaps that's lamentable. If such advice had been taken, perhaps history would have turned out very differently. He was a choir boy in his youth, but not in his adulthood. So he made little effort at school. He went to Realschule, which is those of middling academic ability. He was notorious for his idleness. He was deeply concerned about his image and petrified of looking ridiculous. When he was 14, his father died. In his autobiography, Mein Kampf, Hitler claimed to have enjoyed a cordial relationship with his father, although contemporary accounts suggest that that was not the case at all, and he was severely beaten by his father. When he was 18, his mother died of breast cancer. He soon lost touch with his siblings. I should point out he had a half-brother and a half-sister from his father's previous marriages. From his parents' marriage, he'd had a few siblings, all of whom died in infancy. So perhaps there was a lot of grief around the house, because I can think of only 3 children, including Adolf, who made it to adulthood. There were several more who died as babies, although that was not uncommon at the time. So he moved to Vienna, and Austria had a generous system of social security, and he had a decent orphan's pension. He wished to train as an architect, was twice rejected by architectural school. He was too ashamed to acknowledge this, so he told everyone he'd been accepted, but he wandered around town making sketches of buildings and so on, painted some postcards to supplement his income. He later pretended that his life had been far harsher than it really had been, that he'd lived in doss houses and been obliged to work as an unskilled labourer. He had lots of bonkers beliefs, such as that blue-eyed rabbits were morally good, whereas red-eyed ones were turpitudinous. He was a member of the Christian Social Party, which was anti-Semitic. The mayor of Vienna at the time was Karl Lueger, der schöne Karl, as some called him, handsome Karl, who did a lot for the working class and was also a raving anti-Semite. He's still honoured with a statue outside one of Vienna's principal railway stations to this day. Hitler saw that there was a winning formula for elections: social justice and anti-Semitism. Hitler wrote in his autobiography he'd never heard the word Jew until he went to Vienna. 10% of the city's population were of the Judaic race, and Hitler unfortunately subscribed to this loathsome form of racial prejudice. Hitler was an enthusiast for the operas of Wagner, and you may know that Wagner was virulently anti-Semitic, and Hitler believed that Austrians were a type of German, and he wished to reunite all Germans in one greater Germany. That included Austrians. So when he was 24, he moved to Munich in Germany. His orphan's pension had run out, and he was eligible for compulsory military service in the Austrian army. So by this stage, he had accomplished nothing. He had few qualifications to his name. He'd never held down a job. He wasn't married. He had few friends. Then the Great War broke out, and suddenly he found his purpose in life. He had ready-made mates from his unit. There's a photo of him in the ecstatic crowd outside the Feldherrnhalle in Munich. So at the age of 25, he'd finally had a mission. He served in the army in France. He did not do actual fighting very much, but he was a messenger running from one trench to another, which was a perilous duty. He was twice wounded. He was proposed for the Iron Cross, but he was not granted it. And in fact, Captain Gutmann, who was Jewish, is the one who proposed him for it. So Jewish people had not mistreated Hitler at all. Anyway, he was seen to be completely unfazed by the destruction around him, indifferent to the deaths of his comrades. There was one white dog, Foxel, and he seemed to have more affection for this hound than he did for all the people who were being killed. When that dog disappeared, that impacted on him more severely than the deaths of his trench comrades. So he claims he was in hospital recovering from a gas attack and temporary blindness when he heard that Germany had surrendered, and he buried his burning head in the aching pillows, and he took it very badly indeed. But he quickly moved on, and in 1919 there was a wave of communist insurrections in Germany, and he briefly joined a soldiers' soviet, as in a communist committee, although he later covered that bit up. The communists were setting up committees to run army units, factories, everything in little towns they controlled, but it didn't last very long. This proposed communist revolution was quickly defeated in Germany by the Freikorps. The communists in Germany were following the Russian example. Anyway, Hitler covered up his flirtation with Marxism, and he was back in the army. Captain Röhm sent Hitler to spy on a new political group in Munich, the German Workers' Party. Seemed suspiciously socialist. He was drawn into their first discussion at a beer hall, and he spoke so convincingly that he was asked to be the principal speaker a few nights later. So then he spoke to an assembled group. There weren't even 50 members of the party when he joined, and his first topic was my belief in Germany's future greatness. And when he held forth, he could sway a crowd very effectively. He was certainly a gifted orator. Whatever else you say about him, he did have his talents, and yes, he was a very evil man. So he rapidly became leader of the party and came out with his 25-point party program. You may know, on the 9th of November 1923, he and his friends made a farcical attempt to seize power in Munich with a view to taking over the whole of Germany later. So their coup was crumbling. He'd taken a leading politician hostage, the head of the army, the head of the police in Bavaria. He then released them almost immediately, and they'd phoned Berlin. So the next day, Hitler and his cronies held a march in Munich to try to shore up their crumbling coup attempt. The police opened fire on the cousters, and 14 people were killed. So Hitler promptly scarpered and later claimed he was carrying a wounded child to safety. He considered taking his own life, though that didn't happen. Then he was put on trial. Now, Hitler had been on trial a few months earlier for inciting his men to beat up a speaker from a rival political party, and this judge had given him the absolute minimum sentence of 6 weeks. So Hitler realized this judge was deeply sympathetic to him, which is why he gave a very truculent speech at his trial for the Beerholt Putsch, knowing that the judge would go as easy on him as he possibly could, and that's why Hitler was only given a 12-month sentence of fortress confinement, not even imprisonment. It was a slap on the wrist. 5 years, but he only had to serve 9 months. Anyway, so fast forward to 1933, and he had experienced a most unexampled reverse in the fortunes, from having been a nobody in 1914, almost a tramp. Within 20 years, he'd become the almost absolute ruler of one of the mightiest countries in the world. And it was quite staggering. It reinforced his delusional belief that he had been summoned for some august destiny. As an adolescent, he had fantasized about leading his people to triumph and liberation, but the magnificent future he envisioned obviously involved the enslavement of Germany's neighbors and genocide towards other ethnic groups. But it appeared to Hitler that all his dreams were coming to fruition. Now, many powerful men would be womanizers. Power's an aphrodisiac, I think Kissinger said. Hitler only had 3 girlfriends in his lifetime that we know about. One of these, Geli Raubal, was his niece, who was 22 years younger than him. She committed suicide in 1932, although she was possibly murdered by other members of the Nazi Party who thought she was embarrassing. He tried to keep this all quiet, and her supposed reason for killing herself in her late 20s was frustrated artistic ambitions. She was a musician. That his long-lasting girlfriend, for about 10 years, was Eva Braun, who supposedly tried to kill herself on several times, and her existence was a closely guarded secret from the German public. She wasn't allowed to meet any dignitaries or even many leading members of the Nazi Party, and spent most of her time in the Obersalzburg, in the very south of Germany in Hitler's mountain retreat. Hitler married her a few hours before they committed suicide, and in his last will and testament he mentioned his wife. And when the text that was broadcast after Hitler's suicide, that was the first time the German public had heard that Hitler was ever involved with a woman.